Welcome back, Music Maniacs, to another episode of Gibbs Drops the Needle, your one-stop spot for all things music. Got another Billboard article for you today. This article is celebrating 20 music milestones. They're going to be celebrating their 50th anniversary this year. So let's get into that. The article says over the course of 2026, we'll be marking the 50th anniversary of many music milestones, including the introduction of Platinum Awards, the presentation of the first Grammy for Latin music, the Ramones bringing punk rock to prominence, Elton John becoming the first major pop star to come out, and Stevie Wonder releasing his masterwork, Songs in the Key of Life. It said we rounded up 20 milestone moments from 1976, which we'll discuss in depth, but first they listed the top of the charts for all the different charts of that year. So most weeks at number one on the Hot 100 for that year was Rod Stewart's Tonight's the Night, Gonna Be Alright. Spent 7 weeks plus one more week in 1977. Most weeks at number one on top LPs and tapes was Stevie Wonder's Songs in the Key of Life, which spent 11 weeks plus 3 more weeks in 1977. Most weeks at number one on the Hot Country singles were C.W. McCall's Convoy, which spent 4 weeks plus 2 more weeks in 1975. Most weeks at number one on the Hot Country LPs was Waylon Jennings' Are You Ready for the Country? It spent 9 weeks plus 1 more week in 1977. Most weeks at number one on Hot Soul singles was Johnny Taylor's Disco Lady, which spent 6 weeks there. Most weeks at number one on Soul LPs was Stevie Wonder's Songs in the Key of Life, which spent 11 weeks, plus 9 more weeks in 1977. And most weeks at number one on Easy Listening was Captain and Tennille's Muskrat Love, which spent 4 weeks on that chart. So now to get into the 20 milestones that are going to be celebrating their 50-year anniversary this year. Some of them have already celebrated 50 years, starting with January 15th and Peter Frampton releasing Frampton Comes Alive. The article says dozens of artists released double live albums in the 1970s, but none of the others did as well as Peter Frampton's Frampton Comes Alive. The album had 4 separate runs at number one on the Billboard 200, adding up to 10 weeks on top. That was the longest run at number one for a live album since Judy Garland's Judy at Carnegie Hall had 13 weeks on top back in 1961. Frampton Comes Alive logged 52 consecutive weeks in the top 10 and wound up as the number one album on Billboard's year-end chart. The album also spun off 3 smash singles, Show Me the Way, Baby I Love Your Way, and Do You Feel Like We Do. On September 18th at the 2nd Annual Rock Music Awards, a short-lived award show on CBS produced by Don Kirshner, Frampton won Rock Personality of the Year. The over-the-top success of Frampton Comes Alive and some missteps, like starring in 1978's ill-fated Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, triggered a backlash, but Frampton persevered. Even if he was no longer a pop megastar or a pinup, he was always a working musician. Frampton Comes Alive was voted into the Grammy Hall of Fame in 2020. In 2024, he was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. This is an album that my mom had on vinyl, and I remember as a young kid listening to it quite a bit. The Do You Feel Like We Do was my introduction into Talkbox, and I thought that that was the coolest thing ever. For those that don't know, Talkbox is basically when it takes the sound that would come out of a speaker and instead it travels up a hose into your mouth, and you're able to use the sounds coming out of that speaker and use your mouth to manipulate that sound to where it sounds like the guitar is talking. So I thought that was the coolest thing ever, and I remember as a kid listening to that and just wanting to listen to it over and over again just because of that song. And Peter Frampton ended up becoming one of my favorite artists. He's still putting out music. I believe he just put out an album maybe a month or so ago, and it was a good album. I have seen him live twice and is such a great artist. Seems like such a genuine, nice person to interact with. And I did, as an adult, end up adding Frampton Comes Alive to my own personal collection. And I believe I watched a little bit of a documentary with Peter Frampton, and this was kind of his way because he was coming out of Humble Pie and he hadn't really put out a full solo album, I believe, and I could be wrong on this, but I believe this is what I watched in the documentary. And this was kind of a collection of songs that he had been writing and possibly performing, and he just did a live album to get the whole collection of them together. So this was kind of his introduction or reintroduction to the music world as an artist, and it was such a powerful album to reintroduce yourself with. Very iconic live album. The next date that they give is February 18th. Boz Scaggs releases Silk Degrees. It says the Blue Eyed Soul classic logged 5 weeks at number 2 on the Billboard 200, stuck behind Frampton Comes Alive for 4 weeks, and Stevie Wonder's song In the Key of Life for 1 week. It's one of 2 1976 albums that logged 5 weeks in the runner-up spot without reaching number 1, the other Rod Stewart's A Night on the Town. Silk Degrees, which includes such hits as Low Down, Lido Shuffle, and We're Not Alone, a hit for Rita Coolidge, went on to receive a Grammy nod for Album of the Year, but lost to Simply Unbeatable Songs in the Key of Life. So it sounds like that was a very hard year to release an album, with Stevie Wonder releasing such an iconic album for him. The next date is February 22nd. Florence Ballard passed away at the age of 32. It says Florence Ballard of the Supremes died at 32 from coronary thrombosis, not quite 9 years after she was pushed out of the group. Ballard had been part of the group alongside Diana Ross and Mary Wilson for their first 10 number 1 Hot 100 hits, from 1964's Where Did Our Love Go to 1967's The Happening. She was replaced by Cindy Birdsong in 1967 at the same time that Ross was awarded top billing. The backstage drama in the Supreme story inspired the 1982 Broadway musical Dreamgirls. Ironically, 1976 was one of Ross's biggest years, the only year in which she landed 2 solo number 1 hits, Theme from Mahogany, Do You Know Where You're Going To, and Love Hangover. The Supremes were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame by Little Richard in 1988 and received a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Recording Academy in 2023. Many other notables died in 1976, including jazz musician, a Charlie Brown Christmas composer, Vince Guaraldi, band leader and theme from A Summer Place, hitmaker Percy Faith, protest singer Phil Ochs, singer, songwriter, and Capitol Records co-founder Johnny Mercer, singer Paul Robeson, coloratura soprano Lily Pons, musical director and choreographer Busby Berkeley, composer Benjamin Britten, and blues musician Howlin' Wolf Jimmy Reed and Freddie King. The next date was February 24th. RIAA introduces the Platinum Awards. It's hard to imagine, but until 1976, there was no official certification for a hit single or album beyond gold. The success of such mega-hit albums as The Beatles' Abbey Road in 1969 and Carole King's Tapestry in 1971 made it obvious that something more was needed. In 1976, the Recording Industry Association of America finally introduced Platinum Records. The first Platinum album on February 24th was The Eagles' Their Greatest Hits, 1971 through 1975. The first platinum single on April 22nd was Johnny Taylor's disco smash Disco Lady. The new platinum certification represents sales of at least 1 million copies for albums and 2 million copies for singles. Multi-platinum awards wouldn't arrive until 1984, but at least now there was something beyond gold. February seemed to be a pretty big month in music, as February 28th, Paul Simon gives witty Grammy acceptance speech. Paul Simon won Album of the Year at the 18th Annual Grammy Awards for Still Crazy After All These Years, but even he knew that his path to victory was made easier by the fact that Stevie Wonder, who had won the 2 previous years and would win again the following year, wasn't in the running. Wonder was on a sustained creative streak not seen since the Beatles. He had beat Simon for Album of the Year 2 years previously, when Innervisions topped There Goes Rhymin' Simon. After thanking a list of people, including his producer Phil Ramone and one-time partner Art Garfunkel, Simon said, quote, "Most of all, I'd like to thank Stevie Wonder, who didn't make an album this year," end quote. So in addition to making the year's best album, Simon gave the year's wittiest, most charming, and self-deprecating acceptance speech. Simon also performed his #1 Hot 100 hit, 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover, on the telecast. The other big winners that night were Captain and Tonelli's Love Will Keep Us Together for Record of the Year, Stephen Sondheim's Send in the Clowns, performed by Judy Collins for Song of the Year, and Natalie Cole for Best New Artist. Continuing on with February 28th, Eddie Palmieri wins first Grammy for Latin music. Also at that year's Grammys, the Recording Academy presented Best Latin Recording for the first time. Eddie Palmieri, who died on August 6 of 2025 at the age of 88, was the inaugural winner for Son of Latin Music. The other nominees were Mongo Santa Maria, Ray Barreto, Pania All-Stars, Willie Colon, Camilo Sesto, and Bobby Panetto. Latin music has continued to make an impact at the Grammys. At the 2020 ceremony, Rosalia was the first Spanish singing act to be nominated for Best New Artist. At the 2023 ceremony, Bad Bunny was the first artist with an Album of the Year nod for an all-Spanish album. This year, Bad Bunny is the first Latin artist to be nominated for Album, Record, and Song of the Year in the same year. Moving forward to April 23rd, Ramones released. The Ramones' debut album, Ramones, was released, ushering in punk rock. The albums, which featured the singles Blitzkrieg Bop and I Wanna Be Your Boyfriend, was voted into the Grammy Hall of Fame in 2007 and the National Recording Registry in 2012. Punk was seen as a reaction to the studio perfectionism of such acts as the Eagles and the Alan Parsons Project. There were several other punk firsts during the year. In September, 100 Club Punk Festival, the first international punk festival, was held in London. In October, The Damned released their debut single, New Rose, considered to be the first release from a British punk group. In November, the Sex Pistols' debuted single, Anarchy in the UK, was released by EMI, so a big year for punk. April 24th, SNL offers the Beatles $3,000 to reunite. Saturday Night Live producer Lorne Michaels, which is still the producer, made an on-air offer to pay the Beatles $3,000 to reunite live on the show. Earlier that year, concert promoter Bill Sargent had made headlines when he offered $30 million to the Fab Four if they would reunite for a concert. Michaels' offer was a dry and very funny parody of that earlier offer. In what was just the 18th episode of the series, Michaels made his pitch, quote, "Hi, I'm Lorne Michaels, the producer of Saturday Night Live. The National Broadcasting Company has authorized me to offer you this check to be on our show, a certified check for $3,000. Here it is right here, a check made out to you, the Beatles, for $3,000. All you have to do is sing 3 Beatles songs. She Loves You, Yeah, Yeah, Yeah. That's 1,000 right there. You know the words, it'll be easy. Like I said, this is made out to the Beatles. You divide it up any way you want. If you want to give less to Ringo, that's up to you. I'd rather not get involved. I'm sincere about this. If this helps you reach a decision to reunite, it's well worth the investment. You have agents, you know where I can be reached. Just think about it, okay? Thank you." End quote. On May 22nd, Michaels would raise his offer from $3,000 to $3,200. In an interview shortly before he was shot to death in 1980, John Lennon said that he and Paul McCartney happened to be watching SNL together at Lennon's apartment in New York City that night and considered heading down to NBC Studios at Rockefeller Center for a gag, but were too tired. What a magical mystery tour that would have been. May 3rd, Wings Over America tour kicks off. Paul McCartney and Wings launched their Wings Over America tour in Fort Worth, Texas, the first time McCartney had performed in the U.S. since the Beatles' final concert in August of 1966 at Candlestick Park in San Francisco. The tour helped Wings' then current album, Wings at the Speed of Sound, stay atop the Billboard 200 for 7 weeks, which tied George Harrison's All Things Must Pass as the longest-running #1 by a former Beatle to that point. The album spawned a pair of smash singles, Silly Love Songs, which wound up at #1 on the Billboard's year-end chart, and Let 'Em In. A triple-disc live album recorded during the tour, Wings Over America, reached #1 in January of 1977, boosted by a live version of McCartney's 1970 gem, Maybe I'm Amazed, which hadn't previously been released as a single. Moving on to May 15th, the Steve Miller Band releases Fly Like an Eagle. The album logged 30 weeks in the top 10 on the Billboard 200 from July 1976 to April of 1977, peaking at #3. The album, which was right smack in the middle between pop and rock, spawned 3 hit singles, Take the Money and Run, Rockin' Me, and Fly Like an Eagle. The LP was inducted into the National Recording Registry in 2025. The next day is July 27th. Tina Turner files for divorce. Tina Turner filed for divorce from her husband Ike. 8 years later, she enjoyed one of the most heartening comebacks in pop music history, which crested with her Hot 100 topping Grammy-winning smash What's Love Got to Do with It. That was also the title of her 1993 biopic, in which Ike's abuse of his wife was painfully depicted, with Lawrence Fishburne and Angela Bassett both scoring Oscar nominations for their performance as the duo. Moving on to August 25th, Boston released. The most successful debut album of 1976 was Boston's Boston, which logged 30 weeks in the top 10 on the Billboard 200 between November 1976 and May of 1977. It also spawned the instant classic, yet somehow still underrated single, More Than a Feeling, which made the top 5 on the Hot 100. The RIAA has certified Boston at the 17 million level, a total equaled or topped by only 2 debut albums in history, Hootie and the Blowfish's Cracked Rear View at 22 million, and Guns N' Roses' Appetite for Destruction at 18 million. Boston received a Grammy nod for Best New Artist, but lost to Starland Vocal Band, which topped the Hot 100 in July 1976 with Afternoon Delight. I definitely feel like maybe Boston should have won that award. This is another album that my mom had that I remember listening to quite a bit, and songs from this, I know More Than a Feeling, it was on her 70s 8-track that we used to hang out and listen to, so this is another album off of this article that I have personally enjoyed. October 7th, Elton John comes out. In a candid interview appearing in the October 7, 1976 edition of Rolling Stone, Elton John publicly discussed his sexuality for the first time. The interview took place on August 18th, the day after John performed at Madison Square Gardens, and while Don't Go Breaking My Heart, his irresistible collab with Kiki D, was in its 4-week run atop the Hot 100. Quote, "I desperately would like to have an affair," he told reporter Cliff Jar. "I crave to be loved. That's the part of my life I want to have come together in the next 2 or 3 years. and it's partly why I'm quitting the road. My life in the last 6 years has been a Disney film, and now I have to have a person in my life. I haven't met anybody that I would like to settle down with of either sex, end quote. When Jar asked the obvious follow-up question, "You're bisexual," John replied, quote, "There's nothing wrong with going to bed with somebody of your own sex. I think everybody's bisexual to a certain degree. I don't think it's just me. It's not a bad thing to be," end quote. That was a very brave thing for John to do at the time, when very few A-list celebrities were out and almost none in the rock world. Rolling Stone handled the bombshell sensitivity with a cover line that simply said, "Elton's Frank Talk, the lonely love life of a superstar." So again, another artist that I deeply respect and love listening to is Elton John. And this was a very taboo thing to talk about at the time, and even leading up into decades after that, it was still a tough thing for certain musicians to be able to come out and admit their sexual preferences. So very brave on Elton John's part to be able to put it out there and basically say, "Here I am, you can support me or you cannot support me." He just was looking for love, and nothing is wrong with that at all. He just wanted to seek approval and love, no matter who it came from at that time. Now, we've obviously learned since that time that he prefers being with men, and that's fine. And he has been a big activist for the whole Pride movement and continues to be a role model to anyone struggling with their sexual preferences. And obviously, that's still a battle that everyone's having to go through today, sadly. And to know that he, back 50 years ago, was already starting to get the wheel moving on being more public about it is just a great show of his legacy and what it actually means outside of music. The next date we're going to talk about is September 25th. U2 comes together. Bono, The Edge, Adam Clayton, and Larry Mullen Jr. form a band called Feedback. The Dublin-based band would be renamed U2, win 22 Grammys, and send 8 albums to number 1 on the Billboard 200. U2 is another band that I really like. I mean, the 70s had arguably some of the best music in music history. I know that's a biased opinion on my part, but I believe that the 70s was just a great time to be alive and be experiencing music. September 28th, Stevie Wonder releases his masterwork. Now, this one has been brought up multiple times throughout this article already, but now we have the official release of it. Wonder had been at a creative peak for several years with the back-to-back-to-back releases of Talking Book, Intervisions, and Fulfillingness First Finale. In 1976, he released what many regard as his masterwork, the double-disc album Songs in the Key of Life. The album entered the Billboard 200 at number 1, only the third album in history to do so, and stayed on top for 14 non-consecutive weeks. It remained in the top 10 for 35 weeks and spun off 4 hit singles, I Wish, Sir Duke, Another Star, and As. On Sir Duke, which topped the Hot 100 for 3 weeks, 26-year-old Wonder saluted such legends as Duke Ellington, Count Basie, Glenn Miller, Louis Armstrong, and Ella Fitzgerald. It wasn't long before he was every bit as much of a legend as they were and continued to be. Songs in the Key of Life was voted into the Grammy Hall of Fame in 2002 and the National Recording Registry in 2005. October 11th, Wanted, The Outlaws Make History. Wanted, The Outlaws, a compilation album by Waylon Jennings, Willie Nelson, Jesse Coulter, and Tompal Glasser, became the first album by multiple artists to win Album of the Year at the Country Music Association Awards. A track from the album, Waylon and Willie's Good-Hearted Woman, won Single of the Year. Waylon and Willie also won Vocal Duo of the Year. 6 weeks later, on November 24th, Wanted, The Outlaws, became the first country album to be certified platinum by the RIAA, which we had already discussed was a new certification for that year. October 31st, P-Funk/Rubber Band Earth Tour kicks off. George Clinton and Parliament Funkadelic launched the P-Funk/Rubber Band Earth Tour in Houston, highlighting one of the biggest stage shows in music history. It entailed elaborate costumes, special lighting and effects, and large props including the mothership, which would land on the stage. Billboard recently reported that the mothership will lift off again for its 50th anniversary. 1976 was a big year for Parliament. Mothership Connection, released in December of 1975, went gold and platinum. Its key single, Give Up the Funk, Tear the Roof Off the Sucker, went gold, and the group's follow-up album, The Clones of Dr. Funkenstein, also went gold. Mothership Connection was voted into the National Recording Registry in 2011. November 12th, ABBA releases Dancing Queen. ABBA released Dancing Queen, which is widely regarded as the Swedish group's crowning achievement. The immaculately produced confection has been hailed as a Europop version of American disco music. The song entered the Hot 100 on December 11th and reached number 1 in April of 1977. The single didn't receive a single Grammy nomination at the time, but was voted into the Grammy Hall of Fame in 2015. The group's Arrival album, which houses Dancing Queen, was voted into the National Recording Registry in 2024. Dancing Queen is still a song that is very much a staple of most weddings you go to, any kind of fun dance that you're going to. I know as a DJ, it is something that is constantly on dance music playlists, so still making an impact 50 years later. November 25th, the band gives its last public performance. The band gave its farewell concert, dubbed The Last Waltz, on Thanksgiving Day at Winterland Ballroom in San Francisco. The band was joined by more than a dozen guests, including its previous employers Ronnie Hawkins and Bob Dylan, as well as Paul Butterfield, Bobby Charles, Eric Clapton, Neil Diamond, Emmylou Harris, Dr. John, Joni Mitchell, Van Morrison, The Staples Singers, Ringo Starr, Muddy Waters, Ronnie Wood, and Neil Young. The concert was produced by Bill Graham and was filmed by director Martin Scorsese, who made it into a documentary of the same title, released in 1978. The Last Waltz is widely regarded as one of the best documentary concert films ever made. In 2019, it was selected for National Film Registry. A triple disc soundtrack made the top 20 on the Billboard 200 in 1978. December 8th, the Eagles release Hotel California. When your greatest hits album tops the Billboard 200 for 5 weeks and becomes the first platinum album in history, the pressure is really on to come up with a successful follow-up. The Eagles more than met the challenge with Hotel California. The album topped the Billboard 200 for 8 weeks and spawned 2 #1 hot singles, New Kid in Town and the title track, which many regard as their masterwork. Hotel California has moved 26 million copies according to the RIAA, which puts it fourth on the all-time leaderboard, behind Eagles, Their Greatest Hits 1971 through 1975, 38 million. Michael Jackson's Thriller, which we talk about on our charts list still, at 34 million, and AC/DC's Back in Black, 27 million. This song is just an iconic song. I mean, the guitar solos and everything towards the end of it just make it one of those iconic songs. And I think if you're not even an Eagles fan, you probably know of Hotel California. And it's definitely made a little bit of a resurgence lately with them playing the Sphere out in Las Vegas and being able to put some really cool visuals behind that. Just an iconic song by another iconic band from the 70s. That is the last date that they have listed here on their 20 milestone music moments that are celebrating their 50th anniversary this year. I'm sure to many people out there, and including the artist, it's hard to believe that 50 years has already passed since those moments. Again, all of this came from Billboard.com. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Please give a like, subscribe, follow, all the good things to help me out. You can search me up on any of the social medias at Gibbs Drops the Needle. Until next time on Gibbs, this is Gibbs Drops the Needle. Stay safe and be kind.